The Buddha once lived in the future? That's a skillful title that Ajahn Sona suggested, and it's the beginning of a series I hope to produce on Buddhist cosmology. I have two Buddhist monks who are Pali scholars and knowledgeable on the subject, also several other people who are interested in doing interviews. If you find any of these videos interesting, especially after watching this introduction and explaining why it might be interesting, please check in.
Why talk about all these things? Okay, what has it got to do with my practice right here, right now? The first thing for me that occurs to me when I read these things is that if you want some good evidence for the idea of rebirth, there's lots of really good evidence for the idea of rebirth, right? But this is just like one more little piece that for me actually is evidence for the idea of rebirth. Basically because there is no other way that the Buddha could have known about these things. Here is a man who lived in quite a simple culture, right? India, 2,500 years, very simple, no internet, right? All those kind of things. And when you live in that simple culture, you're just kind of sitting at the root of a tree, right? Imagine yourself going into the jungle in India 2,500 years ago, and you see this man sitting at the root of a tree. And yes, he's a very impressive man, right? You see him very peaceful, very calm. When you talk to him, you get this feeling of enormous compassion, enormous understanding, this wisdom. You ask a question and he answers you in very simple terms, but with great profundity.
I really like this contemplation of seeing the Buddha as a real person. Imagine yourself, being in a forest and coming across the Buddha and just being able to recognize his strengths, his compassion, his understanding. Seeing him as a real person actually makes him much more approachable and maybe gives me inspiration to follow his teachings. So I often do a meditation where I imagine myself being in India during the time of the Buddha, sitting in a monastery one evening, hearing a temple bell ring, imagining myself going to the hall, seeing all of the great disciples arriving, and then maybe seeing the Buddha arrive and giving a sermon, maybe one of your favorite suttas. I just find this really inspiring.
And you get this feeling of somebody who is really special, right? Somebody very special. But still, it is still hard to really grasp what's going on. But then you look at these suttas and you start to realize who the Buddha actually was. He had this mind that encompassed basically the whole universe. He understood all of these things that was going on through the recollection of his past life. So not only is there a good evidence for the recollection of past life, but it says something about the Buddha as a person. Right? You see this man sitting at the foot of the tree, and it's like he has the whole universe in his mind. He has this whole idea of universal expansions of big bangs and big crunches in his mind, understanding what's going on.
This is an interesting point, that if the Buddha did have memories of past lives, he also probably had memories of not just of, say, this particular earth, but other world systems, big bangs and big crunches. And at all of those times, if he had memories of those, there would have been societies that were more advanced than our current society, because there's this kind of belief that, say, societies are always progressing, but you can also see that, no, they rise and they fall. So if the Buddha had lived in times that were more advanced than our time now, that is, to me, gives this really powerful way of looking at how he taught. Like, he would have known things that were much more advanced than what he was teaching at that particular time in that particular society. And he actually gave a teaching where he holds out his hand full of leaves and he says, which is more, the leaves in my hand or the leaves in the forest? And obviously it's the forest is more leaves. And he says, just so, what I teach is like what's in my hand, but what I know is like the knowledge of all the trees in the forest.
And relating it all to rebirth and to aliens out there and all these other kind of things. And you get some feeling for somebody who has a very different kind of viewpoint and image and vision from the vast majority of us actually have. So it gives that feeling of the Buddha as somebody really, really remarkable. His enormously expansive mind. And it's not irrelevant. You may wonder, why would the Buddha even talk about things? But remember the Buddha's surge when he went forth from the home life and he went into homelessness and decided to become a monk. Remember, his search was a search for finding happiness. He wanted to find an end of suffering, an end of this round of birth and death, right? All the problems in the world. And of course, to be able to really fully understand happiness and suffering, you have to understand the big picture. You can't just look at this life and say, I understand everything about happiness and suffering. You really have to understand the whole universe. You have to understand the potential. Where might I get reborn? Is there a place where I can get reborn, where I will be safe, where I will be lost forever after? You have to understand everything. Only when you understand the big picture can you make a decision about where freedom from suffering actually exists and where true happiness can be attained. And this is why these things actually do matter.
I've been watching, say the video you did of, that was 10 years ago, and then listening to Ajahn Sona's and Ajahn Punadama's reflections that they did that 10-part series. I think the thing that really impressed me was when I watched yours was every other video I've ever watched from anybody ever producing, they just jump right into describing what the physical realm looks like and the beings that are living there. But you pretty quickly in your video jumped in and said, why do we study this? What's the importance of this? And I really liked your answer. So that's why I reached out to you first. I was like, can we do an interview? And part of it is I'd like to get your take on, someone who's just entering into this realm. Like, where do you start? That would be like one of the first questions. And then I think I sent you another video this morning, but it was like Ajahn Sona and Ajahn Punadama kind of said, you get a lot of questions like, are these realms real? And, Ajahn Puna's response was, that's kind of a naive question. And then Ajahn Sona responds that, 200 years ago, people probably couldn't have even fathomed asking that question. It's so naive.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, but I think in our modern culture, it's like it's completely reversed. It's like I think people look at when you start talking cosmology. I used to just blank over like, oh, they're talking fantasy. Like this has nothing to do with real life.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts of that or any other thoughts you'd want to talk about.
I have so many thoughts. Yeah, no, yeah. Where would you like to start, Venerable? You just tell me when to start, and we kind of get started.
How would you suggest?